Hello and welcome to Daily Politics, reaching you from Trust TV here in Abuja. On this program, we discuss issues around politics, policy, and governance. I am Suleiman. In the early hours of Thursday last week, Russia attacked Ukraine in what could be the start of a war in Europe over Russia's demands for an end to NATO's eastward expansion. Where there had long been tensions between Russia and Ukraine, a former Soviet republic and next-door neighbor to Russia, things began to get out of hand in early 2001. In January last year, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged US President Joe Biden to let Ukraine join NATO. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the alliance of democratic countries that formed shortly after the Second World War. In response, Russia started sending troops near its Ukrainian border for what it called training exercises. And by early this month, Russian troops had reached an estimated 190,000. And Western leaders, particularly President Biden of the United States, warned of an imminent invasion of that country. Russia had demanded that the West gives a legally binding guarantee that NATO will not hold any military activity in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. In turn, however, Western leaders have accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of threatening European security, stability, and democracy. They say Putin wants to recreate the old Soviet Union, which collapsed in 1991. Consequently, diplomatic shuttles between European leaders to Moscow and Kiev have proved not helpful. And the war is now in its fifth day. But this is not the first time tensions between Russia and Ukraine have reached a boiling point. Russia had invaded Ukraine in 2014 and had also annexed Crimea in early February that year. So tonight we ask, what are the remote and the immediate causes of the war? Will military might win the day, or does democracy and diplomacy still stand a chance? How does this war affect African countries and particularly Nigeria? With me to discuss these issues are, of course, two Nigerians who are much in the know of all of this. I have with me Ambassador Jibrin Chinade, OFR, who is a career diplomat and administrator, a retired permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and a Nigerian ambassador to both Russia and Ukraine. And I must add, Ambassador Chinade is also perhaps the only Nigerian, or at least one of few Nigerians who have met Vladimir Putin in flesh and blood, in person. But also joining me later on Skype is Dr. Henry Gyang, who is a historian and academic with the Nigerian Army Military University in Biu, Borno State. Welcome to Daily Politics, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Suleiman.
Thank you. But before we proceed and jump into this most important of all issues, at least at the global level presently, we'll take just a minute break, and then when we return, we'll be right there for you. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV, and we are discussing the Russian invasion of Ukraine with Ambassador Jibrin Chinedi, who in fact was once an ambassador to both Russia and Ukraine. So you're welcome once again, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So maybe we should start where it all began.
Yes.
Maybe at in the early 90s, probably around the time that you were there.
I think
does that period when the collapse of USSR and the formation of countries like Ukraine, Belarus, and other former Soviet republics, the things that happened at that time, do they have an impact or have they shaped where we are today?
I think I will start by saying that
Yes.
I was posted as the Nigerian ambassador to the Soviet Union in June 1991 by the then President General Ibrahim Babangida. I presented my credentials to the President on the 17th of June, 1991.
Interesting.
And sadly, on the 21st of August, we had what you call the August coup. That was an attempt by the hardline communists to remove President Gorbachev. At that time, he was out of Moscow. I could remember very well that very day when my secretary, Natasha, called me around 6:30 in the morning to say, Ambassador, there was a trouble going on in Moscow. Tanks are moving into town, and it all appears to be a military coup. This was on the 21st of August, 1991.
Interesting.
Since then, there has been, of course, a lot of developments. Gorbachev was removed eventually by Yeltsin. On the 31st of December 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. I could recall that very day on the broadcast at 12 o'clock.
In Russia?
In Russia.
Interesting.
When President Gorbachev decided to resign and the Russian Federation was dissolved, or the Soviet Union was dissolved. Yeltsin took over Russia, and there was a lot of political development, negotiations. We started with the Commonwealth of Soviet Republic.
Just like we have Commonwealth of Nations in the former British Empire.
They started with about 15 states. I was sent as an ambassador to one country, the Soviet Union. I ended up being ambassador to 16 countries, including Mongolia. So I followed all the developments of the Soviet, Russian Federation, and the new states. And eventually I went to Ukraine because some of my credentials were not available. To print 16 credentials, most of them didn't come in. But I went to Ukraine and presented myself, and we had since then visited the country. It's a beautiful country with a large number of Nigerian students. And
even then,
of course. At that time, in fact, I had more. I think I had about 10,000
Nigerian students in Ukraine in 1991.
In 1991.
That's interesting.
Attending, some were sent for technological sciences, some were international relations. Most of them were in agriculture.
Interesting.
In fact, one of them eventually became the Secretary of State government in the Bielsa government, one of the students.
So the issue is two countries, emerged out of that
15
Soviet
countries.
Union. Yes, out of the 15, the two, one, the Russian Federation, and Ukraine. And two of them are now at war with each other. And they're just next door neighbor to each other. And Ukraine happens to be quite similar to Russia, at least culturally. So are there any seeds for today's war that were planted at that pain of that divorce in 1991?
There was no serious division because the Ukrainians were really mostly like Russians. They speak Russian language. They're all like Russians. The difference is like talking of the language like Sokoto and Kano Hausa.
Okay.
Really. Sometimes they would say the spelling is different, the accent is different, but most of them were very much like Russians. I've been to Ukraine many times.
Okay.
It's a beautiful country, an excellent agriculture, with beautiful industrial sites and so on. The Russians and the Ukrainians were very much alike, but the majority of Russians are in the east side of Ukraine. In the west, you have what you might call the real Ukrainians who are really Polish.
Okay.
They are like
They're largely Polish.
Polish, like
from
Polish
Poland.
people. Yes.
Okay.
Historically. But of course, they will say they are not Polish. They are Ukrainians.
Okay.
So the country was then united. They were living very peacefully together. They were really flourishing in terms of economy. What started the trouble really was 1993.
Okay.
When the West was putting pressure, indirectly or directly, for Ukraine to join the European Union. That was the beginning.
Okay.
At that time, the president was in a very difficult situation. He wanted to be with the European Union. Eventually, later, when he changed his mind and came over to line up with the Russian Federation. And there was a lot of riots and demonstration, the maiden riots, they call it. And he was eventually removed in 2014. That's Yanukovych.
Yanukovych.
Was removed in 2015. When he was removed as a friend to Russia, President Putin was very angry.
Okay.
Indeed, because he saw it as a plot by the West, and NATO in particular, to get rid of somebody pro-Russian. So they removed him, and the man moved over to Moscow. In fact, only recently has returned to Ukraine, I learned.
Okay.
But he was in Moscow, supported by the Russian government. Russia got so angry, and they moved over to take Crimea.
So part of the understanding or motivation for the current situation is internal Ukrainian politics.
No. It's not internal Ukraine. It's international Ukrainian politics.
Okay.
Because Ukraine was under tremendous pressure by the West to join the European Union and NATO.
So what's their own motivation for that pressure?
Their own motivation, of course, they wanted to be democratic. They wanted to be part of the West. They wanted to improve their economic relations with the Western states rather than with Russia. And culturally, they are very much closely related to Russia. Language-wise, culture-wise, they are very much Russians. So Putin was very angry with the man Poroshenko who took over. And eventually, there was a big division between Russia and the West, or NATO, on that, because Ukraine was so close to Russia. And after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, there was this understanding that the West should not extend its membership of NATO to the East. There was this understanding. They call it understanding. Somebody say it was an agreement. But the real situation was that Warsaw Pact was dissolved.
Which was the equivalent of NATO from by the USSR
side. So Warsaw Pact was resolved.
Yes.
NATO was still there. Not only it started, then was 17, there are now 30 member states of NATO. And you can well understand the fear and the anxiety in Russia that the West and NATO was coming too close for comfort.
Interesting.
In fact, recently, President Putin put it that it would only take 5 minutes for the American or NATO missile to hit Moscow. While considering the fact that under Monroe Doctrine, there was not a single foreign base in the whole of the American continent. So you can see their fear.
Interesting. So there was this, some people have compared the current situation to the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, when the USSR, put up missiles in Cuba, which was next door to the United States, which made the U.S. Government to... Is there
I
a
can tell you
corollary
that
between the two?
I followed that event because at that time I was a student in England.
Interesting.
I followed the 1962 crisis on television.
Interesting.
At that time, Cuba was communist under Fidel Castro.
Okay.
And the Russians were arming him against American attack because the Americans tried, you could possibly recall the pigs of Bay,
The Bay of Pigs.
Bay Pigs attack to remove Castro.
Yes.
So Russians were strengthening their friend with more advanced armaments. And the Americans, then President Kennedy, took it on and confronted the Russians that they must remove their military hardware from Cuba. Eventually they did, because it was about to start a third World War at the time.
World War.
The confrontation was so serious. In fact, the American ships then stopped the Russian ships bringing in additional missiles to Cuba. I saw it all on television.
Interesting. But is there any corollary between that event and what we have between NATO, Ukraine, and Russia today?
There is.
Okay.
There is.
Okay.
In the sense that the Russian Federation is such a huge country. It's been the envy of the West and, in fact, the envy of the world. The Russians say they occupy a quarter of the world land piece. Russia is so huge. It has 7 time zone.
Within one country?
Yes, from Coral Islands next door to Japan to Belarus then, which was part of Soviet Union, next door to Germany. You can imagine, it's a huge country. So there was this fear that the Russians were always a threat to Europe because of their size and ideology. You remember before the breakup of the two power games, the communists and the capitalists.
And the capitalists.
But since the breakup of the Soviet Union, there wasn't this rivalry.
Yes.
But it became 2 issues,
Okay.
cultural and political.
Political.
Because the Russians really, I've seen a lot of my colleagues in Sky, American ambassadors whom I worked with in Moscow. I've seen the British ambassador talking on television. If you know the Russians very well, they are not only Russians, they are so concerned about their culture.
Interesting.
What they call the Russian soul. It's like a religion to them. They have what we call the Russian soul. I don't know how you can describe it. They're so patriotic about their country, about their values of culture. So anybody who has lived in Russia and had studied them very closely, I'm still a student of Russian studies.
Sure.
They have such a huge, dedicated, almost religious commitment to their state. So they see the NATO movement next door to Kyiv, if it has happened, or if it will happen, because it hasn't happened yet.
Okay.
Ukraine is not a member of NATO, but some of the leadership wants to be. Some want to be also in the European Union. So the anxiety in Russia to have Ukraine, which has always been part of Russia, what they call the Kievan Rus.
Okay.
For over 1,000 years.
Ukraine has always been part of Russia.
Part of Russia.
For 1,000 years.
Religion, culture, and value system.
But it has been an independent country
Now,
in
since
recent,
1991.
Since 1991.
1991, they're all independent. And of course, independence in any country is relative. Independence is relative. So it's the realist approach to this. You have to take on the national interest and the security scare of the Russians, as well as the freedom and individual sovereignty of Ukraine. It's a very difficult match. Sovereignty and interest of such a great power
that is near
like
them.
Russia.
Yes.
If you see the comment of Kissinger,
Henry Kissinger, last week. Yes.
last week, he made a very constructive comment on this crisis. He said, you cannot ignore
the fears Russia
fears
has.
and sensitivity of Russia. To me, really, this is an issue where it calls for the best diplomatic ability to resolve the issue.
Interesting.
It's really not it doesn't need a military solution. It needs the highest level of statesmanship.
But Putin, in his speeches over the past several
Days,
weeks, and months, even before Thursday last week,
yes,
he said that the main concern that he's had has been ignored by the United States and Western countries.
He said that,
which is that the withdrawal of NATO from the borders of Russia, that this is the main concern that he has, and that no one has addressed those concerns. Instead, so who is right?
This is not a new thing.
Okay.
The Russians, we can give you a good example, political example, like Finland. Finland at one time wanted to join NATO, but the Russians put their foot down, and Finland has never been a member of NATO.
Even though it's a member of the EU?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's never been a member of NATO because Finland is next door on the north.
To Russia?
To Russia. Russia has not changed. It may not be a communist state, but it is still a very traditional society with strong, almost religious value of the Orthodox Church. Russia is not a Western Christian society.
Interesting.
It's an Orthodox Byzantinian Christian community. Up to now. I've traveled in Russia, I've lived in Russia, I've had a lot of friends in Russia. Their concept of the nation state is so ingrained in them, like a religion.
Interesting.
So they always, what the real problem is the West think that with the disappearance of the Communist Party, the Russians will become democratic, capitalist, and so on and so forth. But the Russians really, the Russian soul, they call it, the Russian soul is still there. They're still Russians. They don't want to be like Germans. They don't want to be like the British.
But as part of this conflict,
yes,
but at least in the Western news media,
yes,
they tend to make a separation between Putin and Russians. Indeed, even the what's it called, the Ukrainian president, he spoke to Russians directly. He spoke to the Russian army to lay down that they try to make a separation between Putin.
I know
that it is Putin's war. Russians don't want this war. It is Putin who wants the war.
This is really simplifying the Russian nature. I keep on emphasizing the soul of Russia. Russia now has a population of 145 million people.
Yes.
Across a quarter of the world land space. Here is one man. They always believe in the ruler of one man, the Tsar. Putin is really a modern Tsar. He may not like the title, but they see him like a modern Tsar, the king, the soul of Russia. He represents the soul of Russia.
They're saying that Russians are a population used to dictatorship.
Yes.
Okay.
Through the Tsar system, the dynasty and so on. Under communism, it continued under a different brand. They didn't call him the Tsar. They call him the Secretary General of the Communist Party.
Interesting.
But the style and the structure is very much the same. Putin, when he went into politics, I was there. His party was called Mother Russia. That was the party he won his election. I was in Moscow then. Mother Russia.
Was that the time around you met him? Or?
No, I met him when I visited St. Petersburg in 1992. Putin has just come back from Dresden, Germany. And I was visiting Sobchak, the mayor of St. Petersburg, which is the second largest city in the Soviet Union, in Russia then. That's, in fact, the same town that's the hometown of Putin.
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg.
Interesting.
He came from St. Petersburg. He schooled there, he grew up there, he was born there. He was a son of St. Petersburg. When he came back from his posting, as we call it in diplomatic service, as he came back from Dresden on posting, he was a KGB officer. They used to post their people to the States, you know, just to naturalize them. They've been abroad, and now you have to come and come closer to the people. Putin was the liaison officer, what they call him, diplomatic liaison officer to Mayor Sobchak. And I was visiting Sobchak as the Nigerian ambassador, paying a courtesy call on him. Putin was the one who received me and took me to see Mayor Sobchak.
Was there anything about him, his personality, his traits, his character, that you noticed as a diplomat at the time,
must say,
that could explain his current position as...
I didn't notice anything. He was just a good foreign service officer, as I grew up through the system too. He was with Mayor Sobchak, who were there. In fact, I can tell you one interesting thing he asked us. At that time, there was a problem of cocoa in the city. The Russians love to eat cocoa very much. Chocolate. Chocolate is very popular with the Russian people. And they have problem of supply of cocoa to their factories. And they were asking me, what can we do from Nigeria?
Since we produce cocoa.
They know Nigeria produces. President Putin then was asking how we can help the city to supply cocoa to St. Petersburg. That's all I can recall.
Thank you. So, come back to Ukraine.
Yes.
Ukraine is, regardless whether it has been part of Russia for hundreds of years, or it's now an independent country.
Very much so.
And like most Eastern European countries that are no longer part of the Soviet Union, most of them have looked westwards.
Very much so.
Towards the EU.
Even Bulgaria, which was very
Bulgaria,
close.
Poland, Hungary,
Romania.
And Romania and all that. And we can see at least the economic benefits of that access that the EU market gives them.
Very much
so. How is that balanced? Should the Ukrainians just not able to get that merely because they are next door to Russia?
No.
Okay.
No. Because they are Russians. Culturally.
I see.
Linguistically. And in terms of culture, religion. Poland is Catholic. It's not Orthodox. But Ukraine is Orthodox Christian like Russians. The Rus, Kievan Rus, the origin of the Russians, they are so proud of their connections to Kiev. They see it as the founder. In fact, the first capital was Kiev, not Moscow.
Interesting.
It was later on they moved to Moscow, about 800 years ago.
The first capital of Russia itself
was Kiev.
Was in the Ukrainian capital of today, Kiev.
Was Kiev, yes.
Interesting.
That's why they call it Kievan Rus. It was the Orthodox Church came from there. So you can see the historical and cultural connections were so strong, much stronger than that of East Germany, Romania, Poland, Bulgaria, or anywhere else. So and the Russians, there are a lot of, almost a third of the population of Ukraine are Russians. Up to now as we are speaking. So they identify themselves with Mother Russia. That's why the problem comes in. There is the political entity of Ukraine as a sovereign state. There's also the cultural and linguistic connections of history, religion, and culture.
Thank you. We'll be taking a short, a minute's break. Thank you for staying with us. We'll just take 1 minute break. When we return, we'll continue our discussions on the Russian-Ukrainian war with Ambassador Jibrin Chinade, who was, as I said earlier, an ambassador representing Nigeria in both Moscow and Kyiv. Stay with us. Welcome back. This is Daily Politics on Trust TV, and we're discussing. If you're just joining us, you can follow all our discussion on all our social media platforms on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and of course Twitter. And we are discussing the Russian-Ukrainian crisis with Ambassador Jibrin Chinari. So I continue, sir. So, thank you. One of the major issues now is that despite the superiority, the military superiority of Russia against Ukraine, the Ukrainians are still holding on to their cities. They're holding on to Kiev, to Kharkiv, to Lviv, to so many other cities. Russia has not been able to take any Ukrainian city. What's happening?
Oh, I can explain this
very
much. You see, President Putin, we have all accepted, is a very strategic and clever thinker. Left to him, really, that's my understanding. I mean, I'm not in touch with them.
Yeah, that's all right.
But I follow the news. He wouldn't like to go all-out war. You know, he started with the siege of the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbas region.
Yes, and the Luhansk.
Thinking that with that, he will send a signal to Ukraine leadership that I'm coming. So either you come in for a serious diplomatic discussions or I move in. When he discovered that this was not forthcoming, he sent in his troops all over the country. But I believe they don't want to establish a permanent enmity between Ukraine and Russia.
Okay.
Because they're really almost the same people.
So is it a war unlike a war that they're fighting? Or is it an all-out war?
Now, my fear is that the world is failing itself in this crisis.
The world, the rest of the world.
Yes, because there is this huge crisis in Europe, and everybody is just talking of sending arms, ammunition, and military. I think it's high time for the world now to realize that we cannot afford a nuclear war. The world cannot afford a nuclear war.
And is there a possibility of that nuclear war, either deliberately or by mistake? More especially because wars come with unforeseen circumstances.
Now it's not going to be by mistake.
Okay.
If there is any nuclear war, it's going to be deliberate. Because you either have to, Russia has to survive. It is the largest nuclear collection in the world.
In the whole world?
In the whole world, more than America.
Interesting.
And if Russia appears to be defeated either through economic or political sanctions, I'm scared of what they could do.
Because they will need to save face.
With that, more than save face, to save life. So I just pray that the whole world should awake to this crisis, and there should be some element of initiative. If the political leaders of the world, there's the East and the West, or Russia and the United States and NATO failed, I think other countries, we in Africa, in Asia, in South America, there should be a new leadership that will go and talk to these people for a peaceful diplomatic solution. This is not a religious war. This is a political crisis. Every political crisis could be solved through negotiations and diplomacy. So all I'm appealing to your audience, to the world leadership, is to understand that we cannot afford a nuclear war. Because a nuclear war will be fought with nuclear weapons. And if a nuclear weapon drops on a place, the place may not be habitable for at least 100 years.
That's crazy.
You can imagine London. You can imagine Washington. You can imagine Moscow. You can imagine St. Petersburg receiving nuclear missiles.
I think where you...
So I'm appealing that there should be a new initiative
outside of
Europe.
Existing, yes.
outside the present structure of Europe and Russia, the UN, unfortunately, should have done this.
Yes, so I was going to ask, what can the UN do in that
The UN,
initiative?
unfortunately, since the Iraqi crisis, where the UN was hopeless, didn't play any role until the Americans invaded Iraq. It has lost a lot of its authority, moral authority, to intervene. But it's still there. This is an international crisis threatening world peace and security. There should be, the UN should look for the services or the support or the willingness of some other world leaders, not necessarily from Europe alone. There is, South America has not got involved. Africa is not directly involved either with the Russians or the Americans or the Europeans. There is the Asian part of the world. We have India. China, of course, is closer to Russia. But we have India. We have other states. We have the Middle East. We have Israel. Somebody should take the initiative and call for...
So could that person be China? Because
No,
China is the next power after the United States and is the one that stands outside of all this politics.
The next target.
Oh, the next target. Interesting. Okay.
So all I'm saying is this is really my appeal from a modest place,
So what can China
from
do
a modest place like Abuja,
a,
appealing to the whole world that some leaders should take the initiative and to go for peace and diplomatic solution to this horrendous crisis now going on in Ukraine. Because knowing the armaments in
So
the
what
Russian
would such
Federation,
solution look like to either Ukraine and Russia? To either of them, what would a probable solution look
They are
like?
already talking. The issue is one and simple. NATO expansion and Ukraine membership of either European Union
And NATO.
and NATO. There could be a diplomatic solution, as I earlier suggested, like that of Finland.
Okay.
Ukraine, if the Americans or the Russians could accept such a... The Ukrainians are divided. As I earlier said, there
Yes.
are Russians,
And
almost
then
a third of the population.
the Polish
There's the
ancestry.
cultural, the Polish, and so on. Is, in fact, somebody called it a tribal war. Who knows the country very well? Because if you know the country very well, it's not simply...
the war of two
it's not
brothers.
simply the president of Ukraine. There are divisions too. Regional divisions, ethnic divisions, and political divisions. Three, mostly three. So I think there should be some initiative from Africa, South America, and Asia. We can even say even from Nigeria.
So do you think, yeah, that's
Even
quite
from
possible,
Nigeria.
because that's how you become
Yes.
a voice in the world stage.
Exactly,
You know? So,
exactly.
but what would that mean? What would such a solution mean
The
to
sol-
Russia?
No,
Would
this-
Russia accept Ukraine
Russia
being
has-
a member of EU,
No,
but not a member of NATO?
No, that is the team or the group or the leadership should look for that compromise. It's all an issue of compromise. We know what the Russians want. We know what the West wants. West feel Ukraine is a sovereign, independent state. They should be allowed to join NATO or European Union. Russians said, no. You are on our borders. NATO is a defense group against Russia.
But some people are accusing the West also of having one sole objective,
What's the
which is to encircle Russia and to ensure that it never rises again as a power.
No, I don't
that true?
think what they are trying to do is to prepare themselves to defend Europe.
Okay.
You see, if you look at Europe, Europe is a country with a lot of small states. Ukraine is the largest land mass in Europe, almost more than Germany.
Outside of Russia. Interesting.
Exactly. It's a very large piece of land. In the middle of Europe, you have the Germans, you have the French, you have the Belgian, you have the Bulgarian, you have so many. So what they are saying is NATO is still there to protect Europe. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And they can't protect themselves. That's why they brought the Americans to head NATO. You see what I mean?
Yes.
Now there are 30 countries facing Russia without the Warsaw Pact. Coming to Ukraine, which is 5 minutes distance in terms of missile to hit Moscow. There is not one Russian missile near the whole of the American continent. So there could be a diplomatic solution. That's why I'm appealing to world leadership, either religious, political, or cultural group, somebody, or the church, or the Muslim mosque, or the Islamic leadership, somebody should initiate through the UN a dialogue to continue and call for an immediate ceasefire.
But the Russians and the Ukrainians in talks from yesterday to today.
Yes.
But that so far that has not yielded much. Meanwhile, the fighting has intensified. And also, at the same time, the Vladimir Putin has put the Russian, his nuclear defense armaments on alert. What do all of these things mean for the future of this conflict and the safety of the world?
You see, if you can have the courage to initiate dialogue, you can involve the Secretary General of the UN, United Nations. You can involve the European Union.
Commission.
You can involve the leadership of the whole of Africa. Because this is a world crisis now. It's no longer Ukraine and Russia, or Ukraine or Russia and NATO. It's a world problem. If there is a bomb, now we are trying to remove our students from Ukraine.
We'll come to that shortly. Yes.
Exactly. So if there is a nuclear war, the world is going into terrible, unimaginative crisis. So somebody, even if he's in Abuja, should have the courage.
You're talking to President of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari.
Yes.
Okay.
Even if he's in Abuja or in Buenos Aires or in Brazil or in India, it's no longer a Russian, Ukrainian, NATO, Russian. If there is the confrontation to the level of nuclear weapons, you can imagine the level of destruction, not only to these countries, but to the whole world.
Thank you.
We are now talking of environment. If there, look at Chernobyl, accident,
which is in Ukraine, actually.
Which happened in 1986. The place is still vacant, empty. You can't even visit it. So this is one, it's not even a nuclear bomb. It's just a reactor. So you can imagine if there is one nuclear attack on any city or in any country, it's going to be a disaster. So we should appeal to the whole world. Somebody should take the initiative to talk to the Americans, to the Russians, to NATO, and to Ukrainian leadership to please, let's have a ceasefire.
But so far within the West,
yes,
the hearts seem to be hardening.
Very
that
so.
You can have, they can fight this by use economic means, as economic sanctions, as military weapons, against Russia, to cripple the Russian economy, to disable Russia from access to the SWIFT to banks, international banks.
I follow that. I follow that.
Does that look like they are thinking of the kind of solution that you are thinking?
No, the Russians, when you talk to them about economic sanctions, they laugh.
Interesting.
Because they're not exposed to the standard of living of the West. They're still living in their 2-3 bedroom flats with a dining room drinking vodka. They are not used to beautiful cars, beautiful furniture. The Russians are hardened by communist administration for the last 75 years.
Interesting.
So all I'm saying is there should be a leadership somewhere, either religious, political, or regional, that will take the initiative, go and recruit the UN Secretary General to come and tackle. It's not just sitting
because
in
economic sanctions will not stop Russia or Putin.
They will not solve the problem. What will solve the problem is diplomatic solution, talking to one another. Let them continue to talk. They will find a solution. The problem is expansion of NATO. It's a political thing. The fear of Russia is security. Once there is some element of agreed guarantee, there could be a solution. What I can't understand is there should be no war. There should be diplomatic solution on this terrible situation.
Thank you. So let's go to the final lap, because we're just about the 1 hour to the program, to the end of the program now, the final lap to this Nigeria. First of all, how is this going to affect Nigeria economically and maybe also on that global level as well?
Yes, it will directly maybe beneficial to Nigeria in some way, because the oil price is now over $100 per barrel. As a result of Russia was producing almost a quarter of OPEC production.
Of OPEC's production, okay.
Yes, Russia was producing a lot, was producing more than Saudi Arabia in terms of oil. It's supplying gas to Germany and Western Europe, including Britain. If all that is cut off, they will turn around to Nigeria for gas and oil. Only 3 days ago, I noticed the
But our gas infrastructure is not developed. We're still
that is
flaring
where we can,
more than half of it.
We can move in
Okay.
to invest and to call for investment from America, from Europe, and from Germany to develop our gas resources.
Interesting.
It's an opportunity, all right.
Okay.
You don't take opportunities out of tragedy, human tragedy of this size. But a bit of initiative from Nigeria, we can build on and even follow up the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline to Europe. This is an opportunity for us to follow up. Because there was some years ago a plan to transport gas from Nigeria to Algeria across the Mediterranean to Europe. Now there could be a market.
Which will still be a shorter distance
than
from Russia to Germany, the Nostrum 2.
No, it's not shorter.
Oh, it's not shorter, okay.
It's not shorter, no, it's not shorter. But it could still be economically viable.
Okay.
If there is the initiative, there is the follow-up, there is the political will to take it up.
Thank you.
But the issue is what is in it for Nigeria. What is in it for Nigeria is world peace for trade, education, international, multilateral, and multinational growth of societies to continue. We don't want a divided
So it goes
world.
beyond just merely Nigeria gaining from the oil prices going or gases.
Divided on hostile camps in the world. What we want is Nigeria to play its role as an active member of the international community. That's why we're asking for peace for the world, peace for Russia, peace for Ukraine, and peace for Europe.
Thank you.
That's our appeal.
Thank you. So maybe our final issues now.
Yes.
But Nigerians, thousands of Nigerian students are currently trapped in several Ukrainian cities, universities, and many of them,
I have visited them
with their parents with bated breaths, they don't know what's going on. So this raises two issues. First of all, about the performance of the Nigerian government in terms of evacuating the students. We have had the Ministry of Foreign Affairs saying that evacuation will begin from Wednesday next week, but also initially that wasn't the case. They were telling people and parents that they are responsible for their own safety. That's what the Nigerian consulate in Kiev said.
No, you
but
see.
Also,
okay, you see.
Yeah.
The outbreak of outright war took everybody by surprise. I know the Americans have been warning, but we don't have the intelligence to monitor what is going on. You have to be fair. And knowing the Nigerians there, they don't want to come back. They don't want to. I've known them. I've been there.
So Nigeria does not have the intelligence infrastructure
to know what is likely to happen.
Than to warn its own citizens the way the Americans do.
Yes,
that's an important fact.
We don't have that. That's one factor.
Yes.
The second factor is most of the students will prefer to stay because they are married. There is a lot of marriage between Nigerian students and Ukrainian girls.
Interesting.
A lot of marriage. They have children there. I've been there. I've known the students. So they will rather move to Europe. Some of them now are moving to Romania. Some are moving to Holland. Some are moving to Bulgaria. They would rather be in Europe than to come back. Wow, once they are dropped at Ikeja, nobody cares about them. They would prefer to stay in Europe. That's one problem. We don't have the intelligence to know the intention of Russia or Ukraine or the NATO countries. That's why I think just before I came in, I saw a Nigerian on my telephone appealing, ensuring Nigerians that they are moving safely to Romania. There's no problem. They are going across the border. Once you cross the border, you are received, you are taken care of by the Hungarian, by the Romanian, by the Bulgarian. So,
but there's also reports of racism against Africans and blacks in general,
very much
including Nigerians.
This is the serious problem.
So where does that place us Nigerians? You are just campaigning for peace now, but we are being discriminated. There cannot be peace in condition of racial discrimination.
Yes. All we have to do, that is always been part and parcel of Western society. I can tell you a story about racism when I was a young student there.
Maybe we will keep that story for another day.
Okay, but it's a very interesting story.
Okay.
Very simple.
1 minute, yes.
One day I went to buy paraffin or kerosene for my heater. This was in 1963 in Ireland. And I joined a queue. One young boy of about 12 came to my face and said, "You are awfully black, aren't you?" He thought I was white. But I happen to be black.
Interesting.
He said, "You're awfully black, aren't you?" Right? His mother just pushed him away. Racism is there. There's no doubt about it. But you can fight it. You can stand against it. You can survive it.
Thank you.
We all have survived it. You can survive it. But in spite of all that, the initiative, the good intentions of the world cannot be allowed to disappear because of racism. In fact, the best way to fight racism is to show that the racist, the black people, have the ability and the sense and the moral courage to take on this challenge of the whole world.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming on the show, Ambassador Jibrin Chinade. It's really been nice having you here.
Thank you.
We hope to have you once again next time soon on this program. Thank you also our guests, our viewers for staying with us through this program as we discuss on the Russian-Ukrainian war. We hope to see you again tomorrow when we bring you another edition of Daily Politics on Trust TV. I am Suleiman. Good night.